All behavior happens for a reason and serves some purpose. This is true for your behavior, your child's behavior, and the behavior of that person who cut you off in traffic. Understanding why your child engages in a specific behavior that has become problematic for him allows you to determine how best to help him. We all engage in behavior because we get something good or escape something bad. Challenging behavior continues not because you're a bad parent or your child is a bad child, but because the behavior works for your child. Think of behavior as a form of communication, and your job is to figure out what he is telling you. What are those good things your child wants? What are the bad things, from your child's perspective, that he's trying to avoid or escape? Keep in mind that behavior is neither good nor bad. The context and your perspective determines how desirable a behavior might be. Think of some of the things you and your child access using your behavior. You might access something tangible, such as a glass of water when you walk to the sink, or your child might access a favorite toy when he asks for a turn. You might access attention by telling your friend something funny, or your child might pull your sleeve when you're on the phone. You might access a sensory experience by lighting a candle, or your child might access a sensory experience by spinning in a circle. Now think of some of the things you and your child might escape or avoid with your behavior. You might escape a demand, such as your boss asking you to complete a report, or your child might escape a demand by ignoring you when you ask him to pick up his toys. You might escape attention when you sit quietly at the back of a large meeting, or your child might escape attention when he hides under a blanket. You might escape a sensory experience when you change your shirt that has a scratchy tag on it, or your child might escape a sensory experience when he covers his ears to block out a loud noise. It's not always as simple as the previous examples. Sometimes individuals might engage in a behavior to access something that doesn't fall neatly into one of these categories, like control or a feeling of accomplishment. Similarly, an individual might engage in a behavior to escape a feeling of inadequacy or a situation that evokes fear. These categories are just to get you started thinking about behavior from a more objective viewpoint, so we can understand the underlying motivation. Look at the context within which the behavior occurs to identify why the behavior continues. What happens just before the behavior? What happens right after it? Let's look at an example. Jake is playing with his favorite toy airplane one morning when his mother, Deborah, walks in and tells him it's time for school. On an ABC data sheet, it looks like this. In the antecedent column, you write what happened just before the behavior. Deborah said it was time for school. In the behavior column, you write Jake yelled no and threw his toy toward Deborah. And in the consequence column, you write what happened right after the behavior. Deborah gasped and Jake delayed going to school and he missed the bus. There might be other antecedents and consequences that also influence the behavior that you might make note of. Maybe Deborah forgot to bring Jake's lunchbox into the room, or it's already in his backpack and he doesn't know it. Maybe the airplane made a cool noise when it hit the floor. You don't need to write everything down. You know your child best. Which factors might be impacting his behavior? The act of writing this out will help you be more aware when the behavior comes up again. Look at the information you have and ask yourself, what is he telling me with his behavior? What is he accessing or avoiding with the behavior? He gets a small reaction from Deborah and he delays going to school. Maybe he's saying, I don't want to stop playing, I would rather stay with you. Often behavior is more complex than the last example, and a series of challenges build on each other. If we keep going with the last example, the consequence for the first behavior might become the antecedent for the next behavior. Jake might be upset that his routine was disrupted by missing the bus, and that could trigger another behavior. Here we write down what behavior Jake engages in. He cries, stomps his feet, and then pushes Deborah. The consequence of this behavior is Deborah says, "We have to go now. I'm going to be late for work." This consequence becomes the antecedent for the next behavior, which is Jake hitting Deborah and then running to his room. The consequence to this behavior is that Deborah follows him and offers to stop to get a donut on the way to school. We can see through this example that Jake's behavior escalated pretty quickly, and Deborah was doing whatever she could just to get him out the door. What is Jake saying with his behavior? How about, "I don't know how to handle sudden changes in my routine, and I want you to help me"? He also gets a donut out of the deal. We can look at Deborah's behavior in much the same way. The first antecedent in this scenario might be Jake yelling and throwing the toy. Deborah gasped. The consequence to that behavior is Jake crying, stomping his feet, and pushing Deborah. This becomes the antecedent for Deborah's next behavior. It proceeds in this way until the final consequence is Jake getting his backpack and going to the car. Does Deborah get something good or escape something bad through her behavior? Sure, she gets cooperation from Jake and avoids being late for work. Similar scenes play out many mornings in households across the world. Although it takes some practice, taking time to identify what your child is saying with his behavior and what he gets or avoids by engaging in it allows you to intentionally determine how best to help him. The best part is that you don't have to change anything yet. Just go through your normal routine and simply observe what happens. The next lesson will focus on deciding how best to intervene based on the information you collect about why the behavior continues.